Arrival into the jungle the moment the Japanese discovered the war had changed, August 19th, 1942. Dense jungle near Taivu Point, Guadalcanal. A landscape of choking humidity, rotting vegetation, and an unbroken canopy that smothered the sky. In this suffocating wilderness, Second Lieutenant Genjiro Imi of the 8th Independent Anti-Tank Gun Company opened his leather-bound field diary to record observations that would later reveal one of the most dramatic psychological collapses in the history of the Imperial Japanese Army. Genjiro Imi was not a fresh recruit. He was, like most men of Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's detachment, a hardened veteran of China and Southeast Asia, a soldier who believed deeply in invincibility of Japanese infantry and in the superiority of the fighting spirit, the Yamato Damashi, over Western materialism. Yet what he wrote that morning hinted at unease so subtle he barely understood it himself. The jungle felt wrong. Too still, too watchful, as if hiding something. Through the tangle of vines and towering palms, Imi and the rest of Ichiki's 917-man First Element had just landed under the shroud of tropical night. Their destroyers deposited them swiftly and silently. A rapid insertion the Japanese believed would surprise the Americans and set in motion the destruction of a supposedly small, inexperienced enemy force. Everything they had been told supported that confidence. The myth they carried into the jungle. Japanese intelligence estimated that the Americans held Guadalcanal with a mere 2,000 to 2,500 men. Soft men. Men from a pampered society. Men who lacked the spiritual fortitude to endure jungle warfare. Men who would collapse in chaos under the force of a disciplined, night-born Japanese assault. Colonel Ichiki, a former infantry school instructor, fed this belief with an almost religious zeal. He had dismissed every warning sent from the 17th Army headquarters on Rabaul. He ignored orders to wait for his full regiment. He believed his 917 elite soldiers were more than enough to wipe out the Americans in a single blow. "There is no need for reinforcements," he told his officers. "These are Americans. We will sweep them into the sea before sunrise." His men believed him. Why would they not? Since 1937, the Imperial Japanese Army had known nothing but victory. Chinese nationalist divisions had crumbled under night assaults. British and Indian forces had been encircled in Malaya. American and Filipino troops retreated during the Bataan campaign. Everywhere the Japanese had encountered Western soldiers, they found them rigid, slow, and unable to adapt to the ruthless, intimate violence of jungle fighting. But Guadalcanal was different. Catastrophically different. The island would soon teach lessons that would shake Japanese doctrine to its core. Lessons so brutal and unimaginable that many survivors later described Guadalcanal as the moment they realized Japan would eventually lose the war. Yet on August 19th, as Imi wrote in his journal, the war still felt predictable, comfortable, familiar. All illusions were about to be stripped away. The American landing. A campaign neither side fully understood. 2 weeks earlier, on August 7th, more than 11,000 U.S. Marines of the 1st Marine Division had landed at Lunga Point. It was the opening blow of Operation Watchtower, the first major American offensive of the Pacific War. For the United States, the operation was bold, rushed, and improvised. For Japan, it was unthinkable. Many Japanese commanders believed the Americans lacked the will for offensive operations. Yet within hours, the Marines secured a nearly completed Japanese airstrip and began expanding it. They named it Henderson Field, after Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at Midway. From that moment, the strategic equation changed entirely, even if Japan did not yet realize it. Guadalcanal, a geographic hell. The island itself was unlike anything many Marines or Japanese soldiers had ever experienced. 90 miles long, 25 miles wide, with mountains rising over 8,000 feet. Humidity constantly above 90%, swarms of mosquitoes, so dense they form black clouds, rivers and streams teeming with parasites. Temperatures that turned steel weapons into burning iron in the sun jungle, so dense that vision shrank to a few meters. Malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, skin ulcers, fungal infections, these diseases would eventually disable more men than bullets or shells. But on the first morning, the Marines found almost no resistance. The 2,200 Japanese construction workers and 600 naval troops melted into the jungle, abandoning. earth-moving equipment, food, ammunition, tools, and most importantly, the airfield. Within days, the Cactus Air Force began flying from Henderson Field. This single development would dictate the entire fate of the campaign, and it would doom Ichiki's detachment before they even realized it. The tragedy of Savo Island. The moment Japan misread the campaign. On the night of August 9th, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa led a cruiser force through the dead of night and delivered one of the most devastating defeats in U.S. naval history. In the Battle of Savo Island, the Japanese sank USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, HMS Canberra. More than 1,000 sailors died within 45 minutes. The surviving Allied ships withdrew, taking with them most of the supplies the Marines desperately needed. For Japan, the victory was decisive. For the Marines on shore, it was catastrophic. They were now isolated, undersupplied, and facing an enemy who now believed even more strongly that Americans lacked resolve. But despite the victory, Japanese command failed to recognize one critical detail. They still did not control Henderson Field. As long as American aircraft flew from that strip of land, Japanese forces could own the night but would lose the day. Destroyers could run troops to Guadalcanal by darkness. But at dawn, any ship left within 200 miles risked being destroyed by air attack. Thus the campaign became a deadly rhythm. Night belonged to the Japanese, day belonged to the Americans. This pattern would crush Japanese logistics and doom every future offensive. Ichiki's landing. Arrogance arrives with him. When Ichiki's destroyers offloaded his 917 men at Taivu Point on August 18th, he believed the stage was set for another Japanese triumph. He immediately dispatched reconnaissance patrols. He prepared to strike westward toward the American perimeter. He ignored all intelligence suggesting a powerful, well-entrenched enemy. He believed the Americans were weak. He believed the Japanese night attack was unstoppable. He believed the jungle would hide his advance. He believed Henderson Field would fall before dawn. He believed every lie Japanese doctrine had taught him. The first warning, a firefight that revealed everything. On the morning of August 19th, a patrol from Company A, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, under Captain Charles Brush encountered Ichiki's forward elements. In minutes, 31 Japanese were dead, crucial documents were captured, and the Americans learned that a sizable enemy force was approaching the eastern perimeter. The documents revealed a staggering truth. The Japanese believed the Marines numbered only a few thousand. In reality, more than 11,000 Marines were dug in, supplied with machine guns, mortars, artillery, and the ability to call down naval gunfire. General Vandergrift acted instantly. He reinforced the perimeter along the Tenaru River. He strengthened fields of fire. He prepared an interlocking web of machine guns. He positioned anti-tank guns loaded with canister. Everything the Marines built over the next 24 hours turned the river mouth into a perfect killing ground. And it was into this slaughterhouse that Ichiki marched his men, fully convinced of certain victory. Prelude to slaughter. Ichiki marches into the trap. Colonel Kiyonao, Ichiki spent the daylight hours of August 20th in confident preparation. His men moved quickly through the tangled vegetation surrounding Taivu Point, advancing west toward the American lines with practiced efficiency. Many had fought in northern China, Manchuria and Malaya. They knew the jungle. They trusted their bayonets more than their rifles. They believed, without a shred of doubt, that a Japanese night assault could tear through any defensive line the Americans erected. What Ichiki did not realize was that the battlefield ahead of him had been shaped not by chance, but by deliberate American engineering. After Brush's reconnaissance patrol returned with documents and reports of the enemy's presence, General Vandergrift issued immediate orders. The Americans would hold the eastern perimeter at all costs. They understood that an attack was imminent, and they understood exactly where it would come, across the narrow mouth of the Ilu River, which Marines mistakenly labeled the Tenaru. Vandergrift assigned the defense to two of his most reliable units, Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Cresswell's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, supported by machine gun sections, mortars, and coastal artillery. Throughout August 20th, Cresswell's Marines cleared fields of fire, placed M197A1 water-cooled Browning machine guns in overlapping positions, dug in 37mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister rounds, laid barbed wire pre-registered mortar tubes, and positioned artillery observers to call in support from the 11th Marines. The Marines had built a textbook kill zone. The Japanese would enter it exactly as the Americans intended. The night of August 20 to 21's. Japanese confidence reaches its peak. By late afternoon, Ichiki's men reached the eastern bank of the Tenaru. They found no American resistance, no obstacle that suggested danger. They saw only a calm, moonlit sandbar, a narrow, exposed bridge of land they believed they could cross swiftly, silently, and overwhelmingly. Ichiki interpreted this emptiness as weakness. In reality, it was a silent invitation. At approximately 22 hours, the soldiers of Ichiki's detachment prepared for the assault with rituals ingrained through years of indoctrination. Men fixed bayonets, tightened helmets, whispered prayers, and shouted short, sharp cries of determination. No soldier doubted the outcome. They would rush across the sandbar, burst into the American perimeter, and annihilate the invaders in close combat. And then came the warning the Marines needed. Sometime before midnight, a figure stumbled out of the jungle east of the American lines, bleeding, tortured, barely standing. Solomon Islander scout Jacob Vuza, who had been captured and tortured by Ichiki's men earlier that day, escaped his bindings and crawled for hours until he found the Marines. He choked out a message that electrified the American defenders. The Japanese, many, coming soon. Minutes later, the first Japanese soldiers appeared on the sandbar. The first charge, a night scream, turned into a wall of fire. Just after midnight, the Japanese assault began. Hundreds of soldiers surged forward in tight formations, shouting Banzai at the top of their lungs, firing rifles and hurling grenades as they charged across the narrow spit of land. The sound was deafening, shrill cries, stomping boots, splashing water, and the metallic clatter of bayonets. But the Americans waited. Not one rifle fired, not one machine gun barked, not one artillery piece roared, not until the Japanese had fully entered the kill zone. Then the night erupted. The Brownings open. Mechanized death unleashed. The first burst of American fire came from the water-cooled M1917A1 Browning machine guns, their heavy tripods anchored in sandbags, their barrels submerged in cooling jackets that allowed them to fire continuously without overheating. The guns spat out long, sustained bursts of .30 caliber rounds that tore through flesh, bone, and muscle with terrifying ease. Within seconds, the first wave of Japanese infantry collapsed on the sandbar rows of soldiers, disintegrated as bullets ripped through them, bodies piled on top of each other like wheat cut down by a scythe. The overlapping machine gun positions created a perfect X-shaped death corridor. Japanese soldiers ran into the fire blindly, driven by doctrine and momentum. Some fired their rifles wildly. Some hurled grenades that landed harmlessly in the river. Some charged with bayonets raised only to be cut down mid-stride. The Browning crews worked with mechanical calm, feeding belts, clearing jams, shifting fire from left to right and back again. The Japanese did not break. They came on again, and again, and again. Every new charge ended the same way, in piles of bodies. The 37mm guns. Canister rounds turned men into shadows. As the waves continued, the Marines unleashed their second line of defense, 37mm anti-tank guns firing canister rounds. Each shot scattered hundreds of steel balls in a cone-shaped blast at lethal velocity. To the Japanese charging across the sandbar, these guns were horrifying. Entire squads disappeared in a single blast. Bodies were shredded instantly. Men were torn apart before they had time to scream. The combination of machine gun fire and canister rounds transformed the sandbar into a scene so grisly that even hardened Marines later described it as unreal. But Ichiki's doctrine left him no alternatives. His men had been taught that courage overcame bullets, that American soldiers would break under the sound of their screams, that Japanese steel and spirit were unstoppable. They learned in minutes how wrong they were. The counterattack, when daylight revealed oblivion. As dawn approached, the surviving Japanese huddled in the coconut groves along the riverbank, many wounded, some lying in shallow water, trying to hide among the bodies of their comrades. At first light, General Vandergrift ordered an American counterattack to finish the battle. It was devastating. The M3 Stuart tanks crossed the sandbar. Their treads crushed bodies as they advanced. Their 37mm guns and machine guns shredded the remaining Japanese soldiers hiding in the groves. War correspondent Richard Tregaskis watched the scene and wrote, "The tanks pivoted among the trees, spitting flame. Group after group of Japanese were hunted down and obliterated." By 12 noon, the battlefield had fallen silent. What remained of Ichiki's detachment was annihilated. The Marines counted over 800 Japanese bodies, many burned, mangled, or mutilated beyond recognition. The river mouth clogged with corpses like driftwood, wounded soldiers who preferred suicide to capture discarded rifles, bayonets, ammo pouches, bodies so tightly packed the river changed course around them. Colonel Ichiki himself was found among the dead. The Japanese had suffered over 90% casualties. The Marines suffered about 40 killed or wounded. The myth of Japanese night attack supremacy died on that sandbar. The aftermath, Japanese reaction and internal shock. When news of Ichiki's destruction reached Rabaul, Japanese officers were stunned. It wasn't the casualties that shocked them. Japan had suffered far more in China. It was how they died. Not in heroic bayonet charges that overran enemy lines. Not in chaotic melees where spirit carried the day. Not in close quarters fighting. They died in long-range, overlapping arcs of fire. They died unable to reach American lines. They died under coordinated machine gun, mortar and artillery fire. They died because Japanese doctrine was obsolete. Captured diaries from the handful of survivors recorded, the Americans fight with machines, not men. Their bullets never stop. We charged again and again. Each time more of us fell. Our courage was meaningless. This wasn't merely a defeat. This was the death of an entire military worldview. Secret Japanese reports declassified post-war. After Tenaru, senior Japanese officers quietly conducted an internal review. The conclusions were horrifying to them. Japanese troops lacked sufficient firepower. American defensive doctrine was far superior. American machine guns were unmatched in sustained fire. American artillery was mobile, responsive, and lethal. Japanese assumptions about American morale were completely wrong. Night attacks would no longer guarantee victory. One officer summarized it privately. We had entered a new kind of war and did not recognize it. The strategic impact, the first great shift of the campaign. The Battle of the Tenaru did more than destroy Ichiki's force. It triggered Japan's urgent reinforcement of Guadalcanal, the beginning of the Tokyo Express, the redeployment of major Japanese units to the Solomon Islands, the first realization among Japanese planners that the Americans were not the same enemy they fought in the Philippines. But perhaps the most important outcome was psychological. The Americans now believed they could not only fight the Japanese, but defeat them. It was the birth of a confidence that would carry them through the rest of the Pacific War. The shock in Rabaul, a defeat too big to be admitted. The destruction of Ichiki's detachment sent ripples of disbelief through Japanese command at Rabaul. Until that moment, the Imperial Japanese Army believed utterly in the superiority of its training, spirit, and night attack doctrine. Officers had been raised on a foundational myth that the individual Japanese soldier, aggressive, disciplined, spiritually hardened, could defeat 3, 5, even 10 Western soldiers in close combat. The Tenaru shattered that myth in a single night. Yet instead of reassessing their assumptions, Japanese leadership reached a radically different conclusion. Ichiki must have acted recklessly. The Americans must have been fortunate. Next time, with more men, the Japanese would break the Marines. Thus began one of the most tragic patterns of the entire Guadalcanal campaign. Japan doubling down after every defeat, sending more troops into the same fatal trap: jungle, starvation, disease, and American firepower. Within days of Ichiki's annihilation, the Imperial Army committed to a new offensive. The Tokyo Express, Japan's nighttime lifeline. Japan's naval command knew one fact with absolute clarity. As long as the Americans held Henderson Field, Japan would never control Guadalcanal. Henderson Field was the true center of gravity. Whoever controlled the airfield controlled the surrounding seas during daylight, and that meant the Japanese could not use vulnerable, slow transport ships. The solution was born out of necessity and desperation. Nighttime high-speed destroyer runs. Men could be moved, light supplies could be moved, but no heavy weapons, no artillery, no vehicles, no large shipments of food or ammunition. These nocturnal reinforcement runs became known to the Americans as the Tokyo Express. Between August 29th and September 4th, wave after wave of Japanese destroyers slipped through the night, hugging the darkness, avoiding American aircraft and unloading troops at Taivu Point. Nearly 5,000 soldiers of Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's 35th Infantry Brigade landed in this manner. But what the Japanese gained in manpower, they lost in logistics. They had brought rifles, bayonets, personal ammunition, light mortars, a handful of machine guns. They had not brought field artillery, heavy mortars, transport vehicles, medical kits, replacement uniforms, adequate food, radio equipment, engineering tools, spare ammunition. Destroyers simply could not carry these things. Thus the seeds of the next catastrophe were planted before the battle even began. The Japanese morale problem, a secret that could not be admitted. While Kawaguchi's troops marched inland, surviving members of Ichiki's detachment, around 128 wounded and starving men, arrived at Japanese positions east of Lunga Point. Their appearance horrified their comrades. The survivors were emaciated, dehydrated, delirious, some missing limbs, many crawling rather than walking, shaking from malaria, unable to speak coherently. They whispered about machine guns that never overheated, artillery that fell like rain, tanks that moved through trees like beasts, and an enemy that did not fear night attacks. One survivor reportedly told an officer, "The Americans kill us from far away. We never even reached their line." Another said, "We charged into fire that did not stop." These accounts contradicted everything the Japanese army believed, so command suppressed them. It was easier to claim Ichiki had acted rashly than to admit the Americans had outfought, outshot, and outthought them. Kawaguchi's troops marched forward with confidence, but not information. They were blind to the reality awaiting them. The march through hell, a landscape designed to break armies. As Kawaguchi's brigade moved inland, the environment itself became an enemy. Guadalcanal's interior was a nightmare. Rocky ridges, deep ravines, jungle that swallowed men, mud that sucked boots from feet, insects burrowing into wounds, the constant hum of fever, tropical heat so intense it dried sweat before it could cool the skin. The Japanese had marched through jungles before, Burma, Malaya, Luzon, but nothing prepared them for Guadalcanal. Men drank from rivers contaminated with parasites. They ignored warnings and ate local plants that caused dysentery. They marched for hours through knee-deep mud. Rations ran low almost immediately. A soldier carrying 3-4 days of rice often had to stretch it to a week. Japanese diaries describe, "The jungle swallowed us. We could not see the sky. The heat made our minds swim. Every step was work." By the time Kawaguchi reached the outskirts of the American perimeter, some units had lost 1/4 of their strength to disease and exhaustion, and the battle had not even begun. The Americans prepare intelligence, discipline, and systems. While the Japanese struggled inland, marine intelligence was doing something Japan had not expected, correctly predicting Japanese intentions. On September 8th, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, Red Mike Edson, commanding the Marine Raiders, led a reconnaissance and raid on Tasimboko village. In that raid, Marines captured documents identifying Japanese unit strengths, maps showing their approach routes, supply caches, stockpiles of ammunition, signals equipment, and clear evidence that a major assault was imminent. It was the most important intelligence windfall of the campaign. Edson immediately understood where the Japanese would attack, from the south, along the narrow ridge overlooking Henderson Field. Marine doctrine valued. Initiative recon defensive terrain analysis combined arms fire discipline. Edson requested permission to fortify the ridge. General Vandergrift agreed on the spot. Within hours, the Marines began building the most effective defensive position of the entire campaign. The ridge. A natural fortress turned into a killing field. The ridge that would soon be known as Edson's Ridge, or Bloody Ridge, was a narrow coral spine, roughly 1,000 meters long, composed of 3 small hills connected by saddles. Its characteristics: excellent observation of approaches, steep ravines on both sides, limited maneuver space for attackers, clear fields of fire for defenders, natural choke points. Edson deployed. Roughly 840 raiders and paramarines, 81mm mortar teams, .30 caliber machine guns, rifle companies in staggered defensive lines, pre-registered artillery support from the 11th Marines. Every blade of grass was measured. Every likely Japanese route was considered. Every weapon was placed to maximize effect. The Marines did not intend to merely hold the ridge. They intended to slaughter anything that attacked it. And soon, Kawaguchi's 3,500 men would discover this truth the hard way. The approach of Kawaguchi's brigade, an army that did not know it was desperate. By September 10th, Kawaguchi reached the outskirts of the ridge. His men were starving. Many were ill. Most had marched through jungle hell for days. Supplies were almost exhausted. But still, they prepared for attack. Kawaguchi believed his 3,500 men would overwhelm the American positions in a single night. He divided his force into three elements: right wing, attacking from the west; left wing through the southern jungle; main force up the ridge itself. He expected to breach the Marine lines, seize Henderson Field, and roll the Americans back into the sea. He still believed the Americans were weak. He still believed Japanese spirit would triumph. He still believed night attacks were unstoppable. He believed every lie the Tenaru should have disproven. The night of September 12th, the jungle begins to move. By dusk on September 12th, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Red Mike Edson and his raiders stood ready atop the narrow spine of land that overlooked Henderson Field. Their trenches, dug hastily into the coral ridge, were shallow and irregular, their fields of fire narrow and constricted by kunai grass and scattered trees. But the position was defensible, and Edson knew how to defend it. Below them, in the ravines and thick jungle, thousands of Japanese soldiers from Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's brigade crept silently into place. They had spent days hacking their way through near-impenetrable undergrowth, arriving fatigued, hungry, and drenched in sweat. Many had fevers. Many had marched barefoot after their boots disintegrated in the mud. But despite exhaustion and sickness, they carried with them the confidence that had characterized every Japanese ground assault since 1937. This would be another night where Japanese courage and aggression shattered Western defenses. They believed this because they had never before been proven wrong in such an environment. Just after nightfall, the jungle began to whisper. A rustle here, a broken twig there, faint murmurs in Japanese. The raiders tightened their grips on their rifles. They knew the storm was coming, and they knew the ridge was the key to the entire campaign. Kawaguchi's plan: mass, spirit, and the fatal assumption. General Kawaguchi believed that the narrow ridge was lightly defended. His plan was based on infiltration surprise and the traditional Japanese doctrine of aggressive night assault. He planned a three-pronged strike. One left wing, approximately 1,000 men attempting to push west toward the Lunga perimeter from the deep jungle. 2. Right wing, several hundred troops striking along the coastal area. 3. Main effort, more than 1,500 men assaulting directly up the ridge, the most direct approach to Henderson Field. Kawaguchi believed his night fighters, armed with bayonets, grenades, and fierce morale, would break the American line by the sheer momentum of their charge. Japanese doctrine insisted. American fire discipline was weak. Americans panicked under night assaults. Americans lacked the will to stand firm. Bayonet charges broke Western morale. But everything about Guadalcanal had already proved these assumptions dangerously outdated, a fact Kawaguchi refused to accept. The first assault, the ridge, erupts. At approximately 21:40, the first Japanese probes hit the Marine positions. Small groups tested the perimeter, looking for weaknesses. Edson's men fired sparingly, conserving ammunition for the main assault. 15 minutes later, the real attack began. A wave of Japanese soldiers surged forward from the jungle, shouting battle cries and firing wildly. Machine guns chattered. American mortars thumped. Tracers streaked across the ridge. To the Marines, the jungle seemed to come alive with movement, shadows rushing forward, silhouettes appearing and vanishing between trees. Despite the intensity, the raiders held the line. But the Japanese kept coming. The Marines began to bend, but not break. Rear positions reported seeing shapes moving through the ravines. Japanese soldiers infiltrated into the gaps, appearing suddenly in the rear, throwing grenades, firing rifles at point-blank range. Fighting devolved into chaos. Knives rifled butts entrenching tools, pistols, flares illuminating figures grappling in the dark. Entire stretches of the line were held by small groups of raiders fighting hand to hand. Yet Edson's leadership held everything together. He ran along the ridge, exposed to fire, shouting orders, encouraging his men, repositioning squads, and identifying weak points. "Hold your positions! They're coming again! Steady!" He yelled again and again. The Japanese surged forward in waves, breathless, screaming, desperate, but the American line did not collapse. The withdrawal to the final line. Edson's masterstroke. By 02, Edson realized the front line was at risk of being flanked and destroyed. He made a bold decision: pull the raiders back several hundred yards to the final central hill on the ridge, a more defensible terrain feature. This withdrawal could have turned into a rout. Instead, Edson executed it perfectly. Squads leapfrogged backward, machine guns repositioned under fire, mortar crews shifted their bases of fire, wounded were carried back when possible, left when not. The Japanese, exhausted and confused by the sudden shift, hesitated. This gave the Marines precious minutes to create a new defensive line. This decision, moving back to the final ridge, likely saved Henderson Field. The second assault of the night. The Japanese go all in. At 3, Kawaguchi launched his main attack. The assault he believed would break the American position. The Japanese charged uphill through the grass, silhouetted by flares and muzzle flashes. Marine machine gunners unleashed long, punishing streams of fire. Mortars rained down on the charging waves with devastating effect. Grenades burst across the hillside, tearing apart closely packed troops. Still they came. Some Japanese soldiers managed to reach the American line, diving into foxholes, wrestling raiders in hand-to-hand combat. One Marine officer described seeing a Japanese soldier rise out of the grass like a ghost and plunge a bayonet into a raider before anyone could react. Edson himself moved to the most threatened sector, rifle in hand, shouting into the darkness, "Rally here! Hold this ground!" And the Marines held. At dawn, the hillside east of the ridge was covered with bodies. Hundreds of Japanese lay dead or dying. The survivors crawled into ravines, regrouping for the next night's assault. September 13th, the night Japan's spirit broke. The following day, the Marines strengthened their new defensive line. Reinforcements arrived. Ammunition was resupplied. Artillery was calibrated for known approach routes. The Japanese, meanwhile, were in agony. Many had not eaten in days. Some had malaria-induced fevers of 104 degrees. Units were scattered. Artillery support was minimal. Radio communications failed repeatedly. Ammunition was dangerously low. But Kawaguchi was determined. He believed he was one final push away from victory. At 1800 on September 13th, the second night of terror began. The greatest assault and greatest failure. The Japanese attacked with everything they had. They climbed the southern slopes of the ridge in near darkness. They charged again into machine gun fire that cut them down in rows. They tried flanking maneuvers that ended in chaos. They advanced up the ravines only to be torn apart by mortar fire. And still they came. John Basilone, a legend-born machine gunner. Sergeant John Basilone became the centerpiece of the defense. His section suffered heavy casualties early in the night, leaving only a few men standing. Basilone repaired jammed guns under fire, carried belts of ammunition through enemy fire, resighted weapons in darkness, fought off infiltration attempts with his .45 pistol, kept several machine guns firing continuously for hours. His actions would earn him the Medal of Honor, and Edson's Ridge would become a defining moment in Marine Corps history. Near breakthrough and total collapse. One Japanese assault got within 50 yards of Edson's command post. Another reached the base of the hill before being annihilated. But by 4, it was over. The Japanese attacks faltered. Units broke apart. Troops retreated into the jungle. Some wandered aimlessly, delirious from fever or blood loss. Others attempted suicide. Many simply collapsed where they stood. At dawn, the Americans surveyed the battlefield and understood the magnitude of their victory. The cost of failure. Japan's nightmare revealed. The Japanese left behind 830 to 850 dead, hundreds more wounded or dying, rifles, helmets, grenades scattered across the ridge, bodies piled on slopes so steep. Marines had to pull themselves up by roots, broken samurai swords, torn flags splattered with blood. The Marines lost, 104 killed, over 200 wounded. But the strategic result was absolute. The Japanese assault on Henderson Field had failed. Definitively, catastrophically, irreversibly. Kawaguchi's brigade was destroyed as a fighting force. The ridge would forever after be known as Edson's Ridge. Bloody Ridge, the place where the Japanese army learned the Americans would not break. The aftershock. Japanese realizations they could not speak aloud. Captured Japanese diaries reveal a haunting psychological collapse. The Americans are not cowards, they are demons. Their fire never stops. We fear their bombs and shells more than anything. Night attacks do not break them. One soldier wrote, "We charged many times. It was useless. We died for nothing." Another, "We were defeated by machines. We had only courage." Even Kawaguchi admitted after the war, "The ridge broke us. The Americans defended like steel." The aftermath of Bloody Ridge, a broken brigade and a deadly realization. When dawn broke on September 14, 1942, the slopes of Edson's Ridge were littered with the bodies of Japanese soldiers. Hundreds lay where they fell, some with bayonets still fixed, others twisted into impossible positions from explosions or bullet impacts, and many collapsed mid-stride in desperate charges that never reached American lines. The surviving Japanese soldiers who slipped back into the jungle were not merely defeated, they were shattered psychologically. The defeat at Edson's Ridge delivered a revelation so profound that it reverberated throughout the entire 17th Army. Night attacks no longer worked. American firepower was overwhelming. Japanese doctrine, built over generations, had failed. It was the first time many Japanese troops realized that the enemy they faced on Guadalcanal was fundamentally different from the one they faced in China or Southeast Asia. These Americans did not break. They did not panic. They did not flee. They did not collapse into chaos when the first wave hit. Instead, they fought with disciplined coordination, controlled fire, precise artillery, and unbroken resolve. The psychological shock of this defeat was so immense that even officers who survived described the period after Bloody Ridge as a dark hour for the Imperial Army. But the worst was yet to come. The Tokyo Express, Japan's desperate lifeline. Despite catastrophic losses, Japanese command refused to accept reality. Instead of altering strategy, they doubled down again on reinforcing Guadalcanal by night. The solution remained the same. The Tokyo Express, high-speed destroyer, runs through darkness. Between mid-September and October, dozens of Japanese destroyers rushed troops toward Guadalcanal under the cover of night, racing down the narrow waters of the slot and dumping soldiers onto the beaches east of Henderson Field. But these runs were plagued by a fatal limitation. Destroyers could carry men, not equipment. Japanese troops arriving on Guadalcanal they did have, rifles, bayonets, light machine guns, grenades, minimal personal ammunition. They did not have enough food, medical supplies, artillery-heavy mortars, extra ammunition, communications gear, engineering tools, transport vehicles. The Japanese army was reinforcing a major campaign with infantry alone, infantry that would soon starve. The US, meanwhile, used cargo ships, landing craft and air supply, protected by Henderson Field, bringing in heavy artillery tanks, medical teams, ammunition by the ton, food, fuel, aviation parts, replacement personnel. The disparity grew daily. The hunger begins. Japanese troops enter slow starvation. As Japanese troops pushed deeper into the island interior, hunger stalked them relentlessly. Malaria ravaged entire companies. Dysentery spread through the ranks. Tropical ulcers, infected cuts, and fungal rot covered their skin. Men woke shivering violently in the tropical heat. Others collapsed mid-March and never rose again. By late September, Japanese daily rations were down to one small rice ball, sometimes half, sometimes nothing. Soldiers began eating anything they could find: grass, palm shoots, coconuts, insects, roots, many of them toxic. Captured diaries record terrifying entries. "We have no food. My hands shake from hunger. We march and men fall. They do not get up. We are dying every day, not from bullets but from hunger. We used to fear the Marines. Now we fear our own stomachs." One officer wrote, "It is not a battle anymore, it is starvation." This was before the October offensive had even begun. The Japanese planned for October, one massive push, failure not an option. As conditions deteriorated, Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commander of the 17th Army, arrived on Guadalcanal. His arrival signaled Japan's decision to throw everything it had left at the island. Hyakutake believed one last massive offensive could break American forces and retake Henderson Field. He assembled a combined force that included Elements of the 2nd Division under Lieutenant General Masao Maruyama, remnants of the 35th Infantry Brigade under Kawaguchi Heavy Infantry, from the 4th Infantry Regiment, Naval Landing Forces artillery units, painstakingly delivered by destroyers. Japan had approximately 20,000 men on the island by early October, but barely enough artillery, food, or ammunition to sustain them. Still, Hyakutake believed. He believed in spirit. He believed in night attacks. He believed in close combat. He believed the Americans were exhausted. He believed every lie that Guadalcanal would soon expose. The Japanese plan for October was ambitious. Coordinated assaults from multiple sides, a diversionary attack from the Matanikau region, and the main thrust through the thick jungle south of Henderson Field, along terrain now infamous as the approach to Bloody Ridge. This time, Kawaguchi's men would not lead the attack. That honor would fall to the 2nd Division, fresh, confident, and unaware they were walking into the same trap. The battle begins. Matanikau River, October 23rd. Before Hyakutake launched his main offensive, he ordered a preliminary attack from the west. On October 23rd, Japanese armored units, rarely seen on the island, attempted to cross the Matanikau River. 9 tanks advanced toward marine positions. What followed was a demonstration of American anti-armor tactics at their most efficient. M3 Stuart tanks fired armor-piercing rounds, 37mm anti-tank guns shredded the Japanese tanks, marine infantry poured fire into supporting troops. Within minutes, all 9 tanks were smoking wrecks. The infantry attack collapsed. The river became a graveyard. The Marines barely suffered casualties. But the Japanese lost their only armored force available for the offensive. It was an omen Japan ignored. The main offensive, October 24 to 25, the night that doomed Japan. Hyakutake launched his main attack on the night of October 24th, sending nearly 5,600 men into the jungle south of Henderson Field. Their objective, break through the American perimeter and capture the airfield. Opposing them were 1st Battalion, 7th Marines under Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty, puller elements of the 164th Infantry Regiment, U.S. Army Artillery, from the 11th Marines naval gunfire available offshore. The Japanese had numbers. The Americans had everything else. The first wave hits. Chaos erupts. The Japanese attacked in waves, shouting battle cries, charging blindly, stumbling through dark ravines. But instead of breaking the American line, they were met with machine gun fire, canister shots, 75mm pack howitzers, mortars, flares, exposing them to concentrated fire, interlocking infantry positions. The slaughter was immediate. Basilone, again, becomes the backbone of the defense. Once more, Sergeant John Basilone was at the center of the fight. His machine gun crews were killed around him. Ammunition ran low, guns overheated. Communications lines were intermittently cut. But Basilone carried ammo forward through enemy fire, repaired machine guns in total darkness, personally killed infiltrators, reorganized gun crews on the spot. He kept the Marine line firing during the most critical hours of the offensive. Hold them! Hold them! Chesty Puller's line does not break. Puller's voice carried through the lines as he moved through the chaotic battlefield, rallying Marines, shifting forces, and coordinating with artillery. Throughout the night, Japanese units infiltrated deep into the jungle. Breakthroughs seemed imminent. Marines counterattacked instantly. Artillery fired danger-close missions. Shells exploded only meters from friendly positions, but the Marines held. Dawn reveals annihilation. By the morning of October 25th, more than 2,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead, hundreds more were wounded or dying. Unit cohesion had collapsed, officers were dead or missing, morale was destroyed. The Americans suffered several hundred casualties, severe but sustainable. Their lines remained intact. Henderson Field never fell. The October offensive had not only failed, it had broken the Japanese 17th Army. The turning point. Japan is finished on Guadalcanal. After the defeat, Hyakutake sent a desperate message to Rabaul. We can no longer hold. Supplies were gone. Men were collapsing. Starvation spread like wildfire. Medical care was non-existent. Artillery ammunition was almost gone. Japanese strength fell by the hour. American logistics, meanwhile, improved daily. The October offensive marked the last realistic chance Japan had to take Guadalcanal. They would never again muster such strength. The initiative had passed permanently to the Americans. The strategic stakes. Why the sea around Guadalcanal became the most important water in the Pacific. By late October 1942, both Japan and the United States understood a brutal truth. Control of the sea around Guadalcanal would determine control of the air. Control of the air would determine control of the island. Control of the island would determine the future of the Pacific War. Japan needed to deliver reinforcements, deliver artillery, deliver food and ammunition, keep the 17th Army alive. The United States needed to protect supply ships reaching Henderson Field, prevent Japanese reinforcement, maintain the Cactus Air Force, secure the island long enough to build it into an operational base. Thus, the waters north of Guadalcanal became the most contested maritime battlefield of 1942. Ships fought at point-blank range. Entire crews died in minutes. Battleships fired broadsides so bright they illuminated the ocean like daylight. Destroyers launched torpedo spreads that could wipe out formations. During these months, the sea became a graveyard, a place where steel giants bled and burned. The series of engagements fought here would be collectively known as the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. 4 days, dozens of warships, thousands of sailors, the turning of a war. Before the climax, the Tokyo Express versus the Cactus Air Force. Japan's Tokyo Express destroyer runs dominated the nights, delivering troops and supplies at lightning speed, but American aircraft owned the daylight. Henderson Field changed everything. At sunrise every day, American dive bombers and fighter groups took to the air. SBD Dauntless dive bombers, TBF Avengers, F-4F Wildcats, P-400 Airacobras, P-39s and P-40s, B-17 Flying Fortresses from Espiritu Santo. This force, known collectively as the Cactus Air Force, harassed every Japanese ship that lingered too long in daylight hours. Japan tried to solve this problem with nighttime bombardments. They sent heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, occasionally battleships. Their mission, obliterate Henderson Field before dawn. The sea-air-land dynamic reached a peak in November. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, Phase 1, November 12 to 13. The Night of Chaos, when cruisers fought at pistol range. On the afternoon of November 12th, American reconnaissance spotted a major Japanese naval force approaching. The Japanese intended to bombard Henderson Field land, 7,000 fresh troops, land heavy artillery and supplies, crush the American presence once and for all. The bombardment force included the battleships Hiei and Kirishima, escorted by cruisers and destroyers. Admiral Daniel Callaghan took the American task force into Iron Bottom Sound that night to block them. He had 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, 8 destroyers. They were outgunned. They lacked radar training. They had fewer torpedoes. They were sailing into a storm with no margin for error. What followed was one of the most chaotic surface battles in naval history. Range 3,000 yards, sometimes 1,000 yards, sometimes 500, sometimes less. American and Japanese ships passed so close that sailors could see each other's faces illuminated by gun flashes. The opening moments were hell. At 01:48, radars picked up Japanese ships. Minutes later, searchlights cut through the night, and then everything exploded. 14-inch shells from Japanese battleships blew American destroyers apart. American 5-inch guns slammed into Japanese cruisers. Torpedoes streaked through the dark. Detonating violently, searchlights crisscrossed the black water. Tracer rounds lit up the night like burning vines. Ships collided. Ships fired on friend and foe. Ships drifted, burning through the sound. A battle of sheer chaos. The USS Cushing lost power, drifted, and was ripped apart by shellfire. USS Monson fought until she was silenced by multiple hits, exploding in flames. USS Atlanta, Admiral Norman Scott's flagship, was hit repeatedly, including by friendly fire, and sunk. Admiral Callaghan on USS San Francisco fought at point-blank range with the battleship Hiei. Callaghan was killed by a 14-inch shell that tore through the bridge. The American fleet suffered devastating losses, but they achieved something extraordinary. They stopped the bombardment. Hiei was heavily damaged and drifted helplessly. Kirishima never fired on Henderson Field. At dawn, the Cactus Air Force finished the job, sinking Hiei. The Japanese transport convoy, deprived of battleship support, began to falter. Phase 1 was an American sacrifice, but a strategic victory. Phase 2, November 13th to 14th, the Japanese attempt to land troops and meet their doom. On November 13th, Japanese transports attempted to land reinforcements. American aircraft struck relentlessly. Of 11 transports, 7 were sunk before reaching the beach. The remaining 4 were destroyed at the shoreline. Thousands of soldiers drowned or burned. Precious artillery was lost. Ammunition and food were lost. More than 5,000 Japanese troops died in the attempt. The Japanese offensive died in the water. Phase 3, November 14 to 15. Battleships clash. Washington versus Kirishima. Japan made one last attempt to bombard Henderson Field, sending the battleship Kirishima with escorts. To meet them, the U.S. Navy sent a small force including battleship USS Washington, battleship USS South Dakota, several destroyers. What followed was the most dramatic battleship duel of the Pacific War. South Dakota takes the beating. South Dakota suffered electrical failures that left her silhouetted and exposed. Japanese ships concentrated fire. 14-inch shells, 8-inch cruiser shells, torpedoes. She was hit repeatedly but miraculously survived. Washington strikes back, devastating precision. USS Washington, guided by advanced radar fire control, unleashed a barrage with stunning accuracy. 9 16-inch shells hit Kirishima. Dozens of 5-inch shells followed. The Japanese battleship erupted into flames. Flooding began. Steering failed. Kirishima capsized and sank. With her death, Japan's last realistic chance to take Guadalcanal died too. The end of Japanese naval power in the Solomons. The battles of November left Japan. 2 battleships sunk. 1 cruiser sunk. 11 transports lost. 18 destroyers lost or damaged. Thousands of sailors killed. The United States, 2 admirals killed. 2 light cruisers sunk. 7 destroyers sunk. Hundreds of sailors killed. But the strategic situation was clear. Japan had lost the ability to reinforce Guadalcanal. The sea belonged to the Americans. The island would soon follow. The Japanese army realizes the truth. Too late. By late November, Japanese army units on Guadalcanal understood the consequences. Supplies were gone. Ammunition was nearly gone. Soldiers were collapsing from hunger. Entire units were surviving on grass, death from disease, outpaced combat losses. Japanese diaries from this period are filled with despair. The sea has abandoned us. No food, only death. We are already defeated. The Imperial army had entered Guadalcanal believing in victory. Now they clung only to survival. The slow death of an army. By late September 1942, the 17th Japanese Army on Guadalcanal was already showing signs of collapse, not from American bullets but from something far more relentless: hunger, disease, exhaustion, and the annihilation of logistics. Unlike the Americans, who maintained a tenuous but functioning supply line through Henderson Field and their naval convoys, the Japanese supply chain was falling apart. Destroyers could bring men. They could bring rifles. They could bring courage. But they could not bring artillery shells, rice in bulk, medical supplies, fuel, spare parts, heavy equipment, and above all, they could not bring enough food. Men began starving before the major battles even began. The Japanese High Command had sent warrior after warrior onto Guadalcanal, but failed to send the means to sustain them. By late September, many units were already down to half rations. By early October, rations dropped again. By November, most soldiers were receiving less than 1 rice ball per day. The jungle devoured them. Disease strikes first. Guadalcanal was a tropical hellscape. 90 to 100% humidity, unending clouds of mosquitoes, parasites in every stream, fungal infections that ate through flesh, dysentery that left men too weak to walk, deadly fevers that killed slowly and silently. For Japanese troops without quinine, medical supplies, or rest, these conditions were catastrophic. By mid-October, over 60% of the Japanese force was incapacitated by illness. A captured Japanese medical report from October read, "The enemy kills few of our men. The island kills many." The marches of death. To move from assembly areas to the front lines, Japanese troops had to cross ridges, rivers, and thick jungle. These treks, sometimes only 6 to 10 miles, became death marches. Men collapsed every few hundred meters. Others tried to crawl. Some simply disappeared into the foliage, and those who couldn't keep up were often left behind. American patrols later found skeletons along jungle trails, sometimes with rifles still clutched in bony hands. The final offensive, October 24 to 25th, the Japanese army believed they still had something left, something they had always trusted: the ability of the Japanese soldier to win through sheer willpower. General Hyakutake committed the 2nd Division elements of the 38th Division remnants of the 35th Infantry Brigade to an all-out assault on Henderson Field. The Japanese believed they were attacking with 50,600 battle-ready soldiers. In truth, half were already ill. Many were starving, some could barely hold rifles, several collapsed before reaching the starting positions. Yet the attack went forward. Chesty Puller's Marines and the 164th Infantry crushed them. The Japanese charged through jungle and ravines. They screamed war cries. They tried to overrun American positions with bayonets, but American mortars, machine guns, artillery, pre-registered fields of fire obliterated the Japanese assault. When dawn came on October 25th, 2,000 Japanese troops lay dead. Hundreds more were wounded or dying. The offensive capability of the 17th Army was broken forever. The survivors staggered back into the jungle. And there, the real dying began. The hunger, the real killer. After the October offensive, Japanese soldiers reported chewing grass, eating roots, catching insects, scraping moss from logs, eating leather from boots, eating leaves boiled into bitter soup. Many died with stomachs full of grass. Captured diaries tell the story best. Hunger is the greatest enemy. We see visions of food, then darkness. My legs no longer obey me. We are no longer soldiers. By late November, out of roughly 30,000 Japanese troops who had been sent to Guadalcanal, fewer than 10,000 were still alive. Fewer than 3,000 were still combat effective. Thousands were wandering the jungle, delirious. The ghosts of Guadalcanal. American patrols began reporting a strange phenomenon. Japanese soldiers who did not attack. Japanese soldiers who did not run. Japanese soldiers who simply stood and stared. Some were too weak to hold rifles. Some were too starved to speak. Some were found dead while still standing, leaning against trees. Marines called them the ghosts of the jungle. General Hyakutake's nightmare. The commander of the 17th Army, Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, was receiving fragments of reports. As weeks passed, those reports became worse. No food left. Soldiers unable to march. Mass deaths from disease. Morale collapsing. Army nearing extinction. By December, Hyakutake could no longer pretend his army could hold the island. He wrote, "The 17th Army is on the brink of annihilation." The final weeks, December 1942, American offensives pushed forward relentlessly. The Marines were reinforced by the U.S. Army's 25th Division Cactus Air Force grew stronger every week. American artillery blanketed Japanese positions. Navy gunfire was always available. American supply ships arrived regularly. Japanese positions shrank and splintered. In the jungle, starving men walked on hands and knees. Wounded men begged comrades to finish them. Thousands died alone, unseen. The Japanese command concealed the truth from Tokyo. Supplies arriving, offensive continuing. It was all a lie. The Japanese troops on Guadalcanal were dying faster than they could report it. Tokyo finally learns the truth. In late December, after months of denial, the Japanese Imperial headquarters finally accepted the devastating reality. Guadalcanal cannot be held. The 17th Army is dying. A full evacuation is required. The plan was given a coded name, Operation Key, Withdrawal. The goal, extract the survivors of the 17th Army. Save what remained of Japan's fighting elite. Hide the evacuation from the Americans. The death of the 17th Army was almost total, but a remnant could still escape. The decision to abandon Guadalcanal. By late December 1942, the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo faced a truth too catastrophic to ignore. Japan was losing men faster than they could feed them. Reports from Rabaul described the 17th Army as starving, diseased, exhausted, unable to attack, barely able to defend, and rapidly disintegrating. Tokyo's staff officers initially refused to believe the numbers. The Japanese army had never abandoned an island. To withdraw would mean admitting, even silently, that Japan had lost the strategic initiative. But Guadalcanal had become a graveyard. Over 25,000 Japanese soldiers were already dead. Another 7,000 were dying of starvation or disease. Fewer than 3,000 were combat capable. The Tokyo Express could no longer resupply them. American air power ruled the skies. Even Admiral Yamamoto, commander of the Imperial Navy, agreed that holding the island was impossible. January 4, 1943, Operation KE is approved. The order was simple. Extract as many survivors as possible, hide the evacuation from the Americans, pretend it is a new offensive. This deception would become one of the most cunning Japanese operations of the war. The Deception Plan. To fool American intelligence, Japanese planners crafted a bold illusion. 1. Increase naval activity. Make Americans think reinforcements were coming. 2. Bombard Henderson Field repeatedly. Create the impression of an upcoming major offensive. 3. Launch air raids from Rabaul. Force Americans to keep their aircraft on defense. 4. Send surface fleets southward. Convince American commanders that a new major battle was imminent. 5. Quietly begin withdrawing ground forces at night. Admiral Yamamoto himself coordinated the deception. The Japanese Navy had failed to deliver victory, but it would now deliver escape. The condition of Japanese troops, Marine and Army patrols in January 1943 noticed something strange. The Japanese no longer attacked. They barely moved. They avoided contact. Many were too weak to fight. Some were too weak to stand. Dozens were found dead from starvation, leaning against trees as if still alive. By January, thousands had lost over 40% of their body weight. Some collapsed after marching just 100 meters. Unit cohesion was gone. Officers had no control. Disease killed hundreds weekly. A captured Japanese diary read, "We pray for death. Hunger is worse than bullets." The evacuation order came just in time, or perhaps too late. The naval forces of Operation Key. The evacuation would rely on 20 destroyers, multiple fast transports, support submarines, night-fighting specialists of the Japanese Navy. These destroyers were veterans of the Tokyo Express. They could navigate the dangerous waters south of Guadalcanal in total darkness at high speed. The plan? Approach the island at night, load survivors, depart before dawn. Use air raids and naval feints to mask movements. The Americans believed the Japanese were reinforcing the island, not abandoning it. The deception worked. The first evacuation run, January 1 to 2nd, 1943, test run. Before the main operation, the Japanese tested the procedure. 3 destroyers approached Guadalcanal, picked up several hundred wounded, escaped undetected. The test succeeded flawlessly. Operation KE moved forward. The first mass evacuation, January 14, 1943. The Japanese Navy launched a major bombardment on Henderson Field. American pilots scrambled to intercept multiple incoming air raids. Surface ships maneuvered into attack positions. American commanders predicted a major Japanese offensive is coming. In the confusion, destroyers slipped into Cape Esperance. Japanese survivors, skeletal, sick, barely alive, were carried aboard. Many could not walk. Some died the moment they touched the deck. A few, delirious, did not understand they were being rescued. The destroyers extracted 1,900 survivors. The Americans believed it was a supply run. The second evacuation, January 23, 1943. More bombardments, more air raids, more deception. During the night, 11 destroyers loaded another 2,200 men. Many were so weak they had to be carried. Some had lost the ability to speak. Some begged to be left behind because they were too ashamed. Others tried to commit suicide rather than retreat. One Marine observer later wrote, "They were not soldiers anymore. They were skeletons wearing rags." American intelligence again interpreted the activity as preparation for a major battle. They had no idea the enemy was vanishing. The final evacuation, February 17, 1943. The last phase of Operation KE began with the fiercest deception yet. Large Japanese fleets moved south. Dozens of aircraft launched raids. Dummy radio traffic suggested a massive offensive. Shore batteries opened intermittent fire. The US Navy committed large forces to counter this supposed threat. Meanwhile, under cover of darkness, destroyers evacuated the last of the 17th Army, 3,927 men rescued across 3 nights. Many unconscious, some crawling, some carried by comrades, many more left behind dead in the jungle. By dawn, February 7, 1943, 10,652 Japanese soldiers had been evacuated. 25,000 plus had died on the island. The 17th Army no longer existed as a fighting force. The Americans finally realized the truth. On February 9th, American patrols noticed something strange. Japanese defensive positions empty, abandoned equipment, food caches untouched, no gunfire, no resistance. A Marine patrol pushed deeper and found only corpses, starvation victims, abandoned machine guns, rifles still propped against trees, cooking pots half filled with weeds and boiled grass. General Patch sent a message to Admiral Halsey. Tokyo Express no longer has a terminus on Guadalcanal. The island was finally secure. Aftermath of the evacuation. Operation KE was one of the most successful Japanese operations of the war, but it was also the symbol of a terrible defeat. Japan lost 25,000 to 30,000 troops. Irreplaceable veterans' naval superiority in the Solomon Strategic Initiative in the Pacific, access to the southern defensive perimeter. America gained psychological momentum. The first major offensive victory, control of crucial sea lanes, an airfield that dominated the South Pacific. A strategic stepping stone toward Rabaul, New Britain, the Philippines, and eventually Japan itself. Guadalcanal was no longer just an island. It was the turning point of the Pacific War. The end of an illusion. When the last Japanese destroyer slipped away from Guadalcanal on February 7, 1943, the Pacific War entered a new era. The island had consumed 6 months of brutal fighting, endless naval battles, grueling jungle combat, and mass starvation, unlike anything seen before in the Pacific. But something far larger had died on Guadalcanal. The myth of Japanese unstoppable expansion. The illusion of Japanese military invincibility. The belief that spirit and courage could overcome industrial power. The Japanese Empire learned that their greatest weapons, determination, night fighting, and bayonet charges, were inadequate against an enemy who fought not just with bravery, but with systems, logistics, and industrial might. What the Japanese learned. Japanese survivors, the few who made it off the island, carried home a devastating truth. 1. America fought a different kind of war. Not a war of individual warriors, but a war of artillery concentrations, coordinated logistics, unlimited ammunition, reliable aviation, medical support, naval gunfire, mechanized supply. Japan fought with courage. America fought with organization. Japan could not match that. 2. The American soldier was not weak. Before the war, Japanese doctrine portrayed Americans as soft. Guadalcanal destroyed that idea completely. Japanese diaries described Marines and US soldiers as calm under fire, disciplined, resilient despite disease, unbreakable behind defensive positions. A Japanese officer wrote after the war, "We believed the Americans were a weak race. At Guadalcanal, we learned they were a strong one." 3. Firepower wins battles. Guadalcanal showed Japanese officers the devastating truth. One American machine gun team had more firepower than an entire Japanese company. American artillery could fire all night without pause. US naval gunfire obliterated entire Japanese battalions. The Cactus Air Force dominated the skies by day. Japan entered the war thinking courage was the ultimate weapon. They left Guadalcanal understanding firepower is the god of modern war. 4. Logistics is destiny. Japanese troops starved because destroyers could not bring food. No supply ships survived daylight. Air power could not protect convoys. Japan lacked fuel and cargo capacity. The jungle devoured everything. American troops suffered too, but they were reinforced, resupplied, and medically supported. A Japanese staff officer summarized the defeat. The Americans fought a war of trucks. We fought a war of backpacks. Trucks win. What the Americans learned. Guadalcanal also transformed the US military. 1. Americans learned they could beat the Japanese. Before Guadalcanal, the Japanese military had been undefeated on land for 5 years. Manchuria, China, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, everywhere they went, they won. Guadalcanal broke that pattern. American Marines and soldiers proved they could. Match Japanese soldiers in night combat, endure the same starvation, disease, and jungle hardships, defeat Japanese assaults, counterattack, effectively hold territory under overwhelming pressure. The psychological shift was enormous. A Marine general said, "After Guadalcanal, we knew we couldn't lose the war." 2. Combined arms doctrine is unstoppable. Guadalcanal showed the US military that success comes from integration. Infantry artillery, naval fire support, air power, engineers, logistics, intelligence, radar, supply discipline. Japan fought as isolated units of infantry. America fought as a system. That system began crushing everything in its path. 3. Night combat needed improvement, and America adapted. At the start of the campaign, Japan dominated night fighting. But by the end, American radar-directed naval fire, night fighter aircraft, patrol tactics, perimeter defenses were significantly stronger. Guadalcanal forced rapid evolution. What the US learned there saved thousands of lives in later battles. Strategic consequences. Guadalcanal was not just a tactical victory, it was a strategic earthquake. 1. Japan lost the initiative. Before Guadalcanal, Japan dictated the pace of the war. After Guadalcanal, Japan reacted to American moves. The offensive momentum shifted permanently. 2. Japan lost irreplaceable troops. Japan lost elite infantry veteran officers, experienced NCOs, seasoned naval aircrews, destroyers and transports. These were the backbone of Japan's early war success. They never recovered from the losses. 3. America gained a crucial base. Henderson Field became a fortress, a staging point, a launch pad for future offensives. From it, the US leapfrogged northward. New Georgia, Bougainville, the Bismarck Sea, Rabaul, the Philippines, and ultimately Japan. Guadalcanal opened the door to Tokyo. 4. The Japanese Empire began to shrink. Guadalcanal was the first island Japan lost. It would not be the last. Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, all of them followed the same pattern learned at Guadalcanal. Firepower plus logistics, air control equals victory. The human cost. The numbers tell the story of suffering. Japan, on and around Guadalcanal, 25,000 to 30,000 dead. Majority from starvation and disease, fewer than 1,000 captured alive, over 1,000 naval casualties, thousands more wounded. United States, 1,600 killed, 200 wounded. Thousands temporarily disabled by malaria, dysentery, fungus. Total dead across land, sea and air battles, over 7,000. Americans and over 30,000 Japanese. Guadalcanal was not just a battle. It was a slaughterhouse carved into jungle and coral. The legacy for Japanese soldiers. Survivors of the 17th Army carried emotional scars for decades. Shame of defeat, guilt for abandoned comrades, trauma of starvation, memories of cannibalism in some units recorded post-war, realization that death had been closer than life each day. Many described Guadalcanal as the place where the sun set on the Japanese Empire. The legacy for American Marines and soldiers. For those who fought there, Guadalcanal became sacred history. The first major US offensive, the first test of Marine doctrine, the proving ground for future Pacific operations. A symbol of endurance, sacrifice and victory. It became part of Marine Corps identity, the spirit of Guadalcanal. The larger truth. More than any other battle, Guadalcanal revealed the real nature of modern war. Industrial power beats warrior ethos, logistics beats bravery, supply chains beat bayonets, radios beat trumpets, firepower beats mass charges, air superiority beats courage, systems beat individuals. The Japanese soldier fought with unmatched bravery, but bravery alone cannot supply food. It cannot make ammunition. It cannot replace aircraft. It cannot feed fleets. It cannot manufacture trucks. It cannot sustain war. Guadalcanal taught the world. Modern war is won in factories before it is won in the jungle. Conclusion. The island that changed everything. When the last Japanese ship escaped into the night, Guadalcanal became more than a battle. It became a turning point. The first major Allied offensive victory. The beginning of Japan's strategic retreat. Proof that the US military could defeat a formidable enemy. A demonstration of industrial warfare overpowering traditional doctrine. The event that opened the road to Tokyo. A Japanese officer wrote years later, on Guadalcanal, Japan's fate was sealed. We did not yet know it, but the war was lost there. And an American Marine veteran said, if we had lost Guadalcanal, the Pacific would have been lost, but we didn't lose. Guadalcanal stands today as the brutal, bloody place where the Pacific War changed direction, forever.